I pull in early, stare at a parked car, and hear a whisper that doesn't belong to my house. The driveway lies still under the porch light, and the first thing I notice is the glass reflection in my driver's side window, my face split by glare and shadow, as if the car itself can't decide who I am. The location is home front drive door a few steps away, and my immediate goal is small and dangerous: get inside without being heard. I cut the engine, and the quiet presses in thick enough to feel like pressure on my ears, and the other car sits too neatly to be a mistake, angled just off the oil stain where it never parks its hood, cooling in the night air. I lift my hand and stop before the door handle, because the whisper arrives again, low and practiced, sliding through the crack where the door didn't quite seal a sound that carries familiarity without belonging. I breathe once and watch my reflection blink back at me, the glass turning my eyes into a question I refuse to answer yet. I step out, shoes silent on concrete, and the porch light flicks my shadow across the door, thin and wrong. Inside the house holds its breath. I reach for my phone, and the screen lights my cheek, and I tilt it away, not wanting my face caught in another reflection, not wanting proof of what I'm already hearing. A floorboard inside sighs. "Did you lock it?" a voice asks, soft and confident. The whisper isn't loud, but it knows the room. I don't move. The door's glass pane shows the hallway beyond a faint smear of light and motion that turns into nothing when I shift my weight. I place my palm on the wood and feel warmth where there shouldn't be any, as if the house has been used recently, in a way I wasn't invited to witness. "It's fine," someone murmurs, and the word fine lands like a tool meant to close things. I swallow and lean closer, the smell of my own car oil mixing with whatever's inside, and the reflection doubles me again, a man arriving and a man deciding. I press my ear to this door, and the whisper stops, replaced by a pause that stretches just long enough to be intentional. "You're sure?" another voice says, lower, unfamiliar, and the house answers with silence that feels arranged. I pull my hand back, and my reflection follows, delayed by a heartbeat, like it needs permission. I take one step toward the garage and stop, because retreat would be a lie I can't afford yet. The porch light hums and throws my shadow onto the glass, and I see two silhouettes where there should be one. "Say it again." A voice inside says, gentle and commanding. "Say it quietly." The words scrape. I straighten, because standing still is suddenly an act. I whisper to the night I'm home, not loud enough to be heard, loud enough to decide. The door handle turns a fraction and stops, metal ticking back into place, and the whisper returns closer now, as if it's testing the room. "Don't," someone breathes. "He won't." I watch my reflection harden into something flatter, and I know the rule I'm breaking. I am listening when I should be entering, cataloging when I should be acting. I clear my throat, and the sound feels too big for the space. "Who's there?" I call, keeping my voice level, and the consequence is immediate. The whisper dies, and footsteps scatter like coins on tile. Just a second comes an answer, too quick, too ready. I step back into the light, and the glass gives me back a steadier version of myself. Jaw set, eyes clear, a man who can wait. I glance at the other car again and memorize the curve of its hood, the way the windshield reflects the porch light at an angle that hides the interior. "Open the door," I say, and the words change the air. A lock clicks, then another, then nothing. Inside, a chair scrapes. "Why are you home early?" someone asks, and the question lands wrong because it's framed as an error. I take a breath and let the glass reflection anchor me, my mouth moving without rehearsal. "I finished," I say, and the simplicity feels like a test. The door opens a few inches and stops the gap, a narrow blade of light cutting my shadow in half. I see an eye, then a smile that arrives a beat late. "You startled me," the voice says, and the sentence asks me to accept responsibility for my own shock. I lean forward until my reflection disappears, and only the gap remains. "Move," I say, and the consequence is a pause that tells me I'm not alone anymore. The whisper returns behind the door, calm and close, and the glass shows two shapes where one should stand. The gap widens, and the hallway light spills out, bleaching my shadow into something thin, and I step inside without looking away, because looking away would be an agreement I refuse to make. The door closes behind me, sealing the house with a sound that changes what leaving will mean. I'm Daniel Reeves, 41, a commercial property insurance adjuster from Aurora, Colorado. And before that night, I believed routine was a form of protection. The weeks before I came home early folded themselves into a rhythm. I trusted the kind built from small certainties that never announce their value until they're gone. I left the office at the same time, drove the same route, parked in the same place, and turned the cold doorknob with the same grip, feeling the metal register my palm like a receipt. The location was always the house interior rooms, arranged the way we agreed they would be, and my immediate goal was consistency. Arrive, enter, exhale. Laura would call from the kitchen, "You're late?" or "Dinner's almost done," and I would answer without checking where the sound came from because trust is efficient that way. I didn't look for reflections then, but they were everywhere. If I'd cared to notice my face doubling in the oven door, our hallway mirror, offering a version of us that lagged by a fraction of a second. Reflection bends when I move, not when the truth does. I remember that line now because it hid in plain sight a quiet image without instruction. At the time, the house felt solid. The door chain clicked into place with a familiar pitch, and I told myself the warmth on the knob meant the heat was working properly, not that someone else had used it recently. "Did you get the mail?" Laura asked one night, and I answered tomorrow, because tomorrow was a currency we spent freely. I noticed small things and filed them away. The way I do, claims Laura's phone face down more often, a car idling across the street longer than necessary, but I didn't assign them value. "You're overthinking," she said once, smiling, as she wiped the counter and the smile arrived on time, which mattered to me more than the words. I took off my jacket and hung it where it always went, rain or shine, and the hook bit into the fabric with a sound I could recognize blindfolded. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, our knees not quite touching the television, filling space with noise that passed for togetherness. "Long day?" I asked. "Just meetings," she said, and the answer fit because meetings explain absences without demanding detail. I walked through the house at night and turned off lights, my reflection in each dark pane collapsing into one shape as the room went black. I slept easily because the house slept easily, and when I woke to the sound of the door chain moving, I told myself it was the wind, even though the air was still. One evening I touched the knob and paused, registering heat again, a detail I logged without conclusion. "You okay?" Laura called, and I said, "Yeah, because yes is the easiest lie to tell yourself." I remember the mirror over the sink that night, angled just enough to catch the doorway behind me, and how I adjusted it without knowing why, as if correcting a picture that didn't sit right. "You're quiet," she said. "Just tired," I answered, and the consequence was nothing. No argument, no correction, only the continuation of a rhythm that rewarded silence. I kept believing the house was mine because it recognized my habits, and habits feel like ownership. The weeks passed, and I didn't come home early, didn't change my route, didn't test the chain twice. I let routine do the work of certainty for me, and it complied until the night it didn't. I turned the cold doorknob every evening and trusted the warmth as proof of normal. Routine carried me forward even as the reflections behind me stopped lining up. By the third week, the house felt smaller, not in square footage, but in permission. I moved through it like someone else might be listening, even when I was alone, and the location stayed fixed. Kitchen hallway, the narrow strip of light under the bedroom door, while my goal shifted from comfort to confirmation. That night I came in later than usual on purpose, keys quiet, breath measured, and the first thing I noticed was how quickly the lights were off, how decisively the dark arrived. I stood in the hallway and let my eyes adjust the phone light brushing my cheek as I checked the time once and turned it face down again. "You hungry?" Laura called from the bedroom. Casual practiced. "I ate," I said, and the consequence was a pause that told me I'd disrupted a script. I didn't push then. I waited until the house settled into its noises, the fridge hum, the distant car passing the floor cooling, and I told myself waiting was restraint, not fear. When Laura fell asleep, I slid from the bed and padded to the living room, the couch holding the shape of someone who had sat there earlier, then stood. I picked up the throw pillow and set it back because order calms me, because order suggests innocence. The phone buzzed once on the coffee table and went dark. I didn't touch it. I watched the reflection in the black screen, my face ghosted and doubled, and remembered the line I hadn't understood yet. Reflection bends when I move, not when the truth does. I waited until the house felt safe again, which is to say until it felt quiet enough to lie to me. I didn't plan to look at her phone. I planned to put it back where it belonged. That was the rule I told myself, the way you frame a claim to make it pass. I lifted it, and the screen lit my cheek too bright in the dark, and I angled it away, the glow bouncing off the window and back at me. "Don't," I whispered to myself, or to the house, and the whisper didn't answer. I swiped without unlocking just enough to see the top edge where messages announced themselves without asking permission. The preview slid down and stopped a sliver of language cut clean. A name I didn't recognize wasn't there. Instead, there was a line and a symbol, a clipped sentence that assumed familiarity. The location tag beneath it read, "Garage," and a masked account ending flickered into view. 82 before the screen dimmed again. My pulse moved into my throat, a physical reaction I cataloged without comment. The evidence cost me time. I stood there too long, light on shadow visible through the window, and the risk wasn't abstract. Footsteps shifted in the bedroom. "Dan, Laura," said sleep-heavy. "Water," I answered, and the lie arrived easily practiced muscle memory. The consequence was the mattress creaking as she turned away. I set the phone down and stepped back, my reflection in the glass, turning into a shape that didn't quite match me. I replayed the preview in my head, the way you replay a loss you know will be disputed. "You're tired," I told myself out loud, because hearing it matters. I filled a glass at the sink and watched my face fracture in the curved surface, the light slicing my features into decisions. When I went back to bed, Laura's breathing was steady, and I lay there counting it, measuring the distance between inhale and exhale like a margin. "You okay?" she murmured, without opening her eyes. "Fine," I said, and the word "fine" did what it always did. It closed a door. Sleep didn't come. I stared at the ceiling and ran through alternatives that preserved routine, wrong phone, wrong context, wrong me. In the morning I left early, not because I needed to, but because leaving creates data. Meeting Laura asked, tying her hair back. Inspection, I said, and the specificity felt like a test I passed. All day I moved through other people's losses, photographed damage, wrote notes, signed forms. At 11:47 a.m., my phone buzzed with a reminder I didn't set, and I flinched like a man caught on camera. "You good a contractor?" asked, clipboard in hand. "Yeah," I said, and the word did nothing this time. I drove home with the radio off and parked a house away, watching the driveway like it might confess. Nothing happened. That, too, was information. That evening, I cooked and cleaned and waited. Laura moved through the house with ease, touching my arm as she passed a contact that felt timed. "You're quiet," she said, smiling. "Long day," I replied, and the smile held, which mattered more than it should have. After dinner, she showered, and the phone sat on the counter face down. I stood there and did nothing until doing nothing felt like a decision. When I lifted the phone this time, I unlocked it. The screen reflected my face, then dissolved into text. I scrolled carefully, not far, just enough to confirm the pattern without reading the story. A thread without a name, pinned low, the kind you hide by pretending you don't care about it. The preview I'd seen the night before sat there unchanged, and beneath it, a line that used a time reference without numbers, an assumption of overlap. The location field, again garage. A small ref code sat in the corner, 4 characters that meant nothing to me and everything to someone else. I took a screenshot, and my thumb hesitated, the sound of the capture too loud in my head. The cost arrived immediately. "What are you doing?" Laura asked from the hallway, towel in her hair, eyes sharp. I didn't flinch. "Checking a message," I said, and the truth of the words did the work of a lie. She stepped closer, and the light from the phone cut her face in half. "That's private," she said, and there it was, the first clean line drawn. So is the garage, I replied, and the sentence landed with a weight I hadn't intended. Her smile didn't arrive at all this time. "You're being paranoid," she said, and the cruelty in it was how specific it was, how it named a flaw and dressed it as concern. "Read it again. Your title is Husband, not Hall Monitor," she added, and the needle line found its mark. I locked the phone and set it down. Not because I was done, but because escalation too early wastes leverage. "I'm going for a walk," I said. "At night," she asked. "Now," I said, and the consequence was her stepping aside the path, clearing with a politeness that felt rehearsed. Outside, the air cut clean, and the house behind me went dark in sections like a ship sealing compartments. I walked the block and back, counting steps, replaying the screenshot in my head until it fixed itself there, undeniable. When I returned, the phone was gone from the counter. Laura was on the couch, hands empty. "You okay?" she asked again, softer. "Yeah," I said, and the word finally sounded like a lie. I went to bed and slept, because sleep is another way to delay, and delay had become a strategy. The next morning I checked my cloud and found the image where I'd left it time-stamped by the system I trusted when people didn't. I zoomed in on the safe edges, the location tag, the masked account, the ref code that would anchor a future argument. I saved it twice in 2 places, because redundancy is a habit that outlives innocence. Downstairs, Laura poured coffee and set a mug in front of me. "You look rough," she said. "I didn't sleep." I answered, and the truth didn't move her. "You should talk to someone," she said, and the suggestion carried a warning. I sipped and watched the steam blur my reflection in the microwave door. The house felt cooperative, almost kind, and that kindness felt strategic. I stood and kissed her cheek, the phone light memory warming my skin where it had touched the night before. "I'll be late," I said. "Okay," she replied, already turning away. I stepped outside with the image saved and the rule broken, and I understood the new shape of my days collect, confirm, wait. The screen's glow burned the message into my cheek, and the garage tag refused every innocent explanation. I walked out knowing the house had started keeping time without me. The public space made everything feel louder even before anyone spoke. The location was the neighborhood clubhouse lobby, all glass and laminate, bright enough to erase nuance, and my immediate goal was narrow and procedural, verify what I already knew without tipping my hand. I arrived mid-afternoon when the place pretends to be neutral parents signing forms, a contractor waiting on a badge, a bulletin board layered with notices no one reads. The time mattered because people drift through, then enough witnesses to matter, not enough to care. I nodded at Mara Jennings behind the desk, her security console glowing like an altar, and she returned the nod with the same economy. "You're early," she said. "Just need a still," I replied, and the sentence was calibrated to sound boring. The camera feed reflected in the glass behind her a grid of angles that flattened the world into squares. I stood where I could see without being seen, my face doubled in the lobby window, the glass reflection turning my jaw into a question mark. "Which date?" Mara asked, fingers already moving. "Yesterday," I said, and felt the lie of omission take hold. "Time window midday," I added, and she glanced up sharp. "That's vague." "It's accurate," I said, and the consequence was her looking again at the screen instead of at me. She pulled a time-stamped CCTV still and slid it forward the paper, whispering against the counter. The object anchored the room, a hard copy, with a faint grid corner stamped with a ref code and a location tag, Clubhouse Lot West Angle. The image showed a car where it didn't belong, angled just off the oil stain I'd memorized, sunlight catching the windshield in a way that hid the interior. The timestamp sat in the corner, clean and indifferent. I leaned in and felt the air shift. A woman beside me craned her neck, curiosity waking. "Is that my car?" she asked, half joking. "No," Mara said, already sliding the image back. "This is restricted." The woman smiled and stepped away, and the smile drained when she realized restriction means someone decided something mattered. I kept my hands flat on the counter, palms open as if surrender could pass for patience. "Can I get a copy?" I asked. "Policy says no," Mara replied. "Read the clause out loud," I said quietly, not to challenge her, but to anchor us both. She didn't read it. She looked at me instead. "What's this about Dan?" she asked, "using my name because public rooms reward familiarity." "I'm checking overlap," I said, and the phrase did its work, technical, dull, unromantic. She hesitated, then tapped a key. The printer hummed again, and the seconds still slid out with a different angle. Different ref code. Same truth. The cost came immediately. "You know we log requests," she said, voice low. I know I answered. The room absorbed that exchange and changed its posture. The contractor stopped scrolling his phone. A mother paused mid-sentence. I took the papers and felt the weight of them, how paper makes things real in a way screens avoid. "You shouldn't," Mara said, not finishing the sentence. "I won't," I replied, and the lie was narrow enough to be true. I folded the stills into my jacket and turned, catching my reflection in the glass door, two versions of me, one leaving, one staying to argue. I chose leaving. Outside, the sun flattened everything into clarity. The lot was half-full cars parked in their agreed places, like pieces that believe in order. I crossed the asphalt and stopped at the curb, letting a passerby break my line of sight so I could look without being seen. The angle mattered. The windshield glare and the still made sense now. The car had been positioned to hide its interior from the building to look like a mistake that could be denied. I heard footsteps behind me. "Dan," someone said, and when I turned, it was a neighbor I knew by dog not name. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Fine," I said, and the word tasted wrong again. He nodded anyway, because public spaces run on acceptance. "We've had break-ins," he offered, gesturing vaguely. "You never know. You never do." I agreed, and the sentence carried more than he could hear. I walked the perimeter and counted cameras, a habit that used to be professional and now felt personal. At the far corner, a phone lifted someone recording their kid's skateboard run, and I angled away, not wanting my face in a story I didn't control. I checked my watch once and stopped. Time presses harder when you acknowledge it. Back inside the lobby had resumed its hum, and I took a seat by the window to wait out suspicion. The glass reflection there was unforgiving, the light splitting my face down the middle, and I watched myself learn something without celebrating it. My phone buzzed. A message from Laura. No preview, just the notification bubble hovering like a test. I didn't open it. I stood and walked to the board by the door, pretending to read a flyer, and felt eyes on me that pretended not to be. Sir Mara said louder this time, and the room tilted toward her voice. "We need to talk about access." I turned slowly. "Now?" I asked. Now she confirmed, and the contractor coughed to fill the space. We stepped aside the glass podium between us, reflecting our faces into one composite. "This puts me in a position," she said. "So does the truth," I replied, and the sentence landed flat, because public rooms sand down edges. She slid a clipboard toward me. "Sign here," she said. "Log acknowledgement." I read the line and signed my name, clean and legible ownership of consequence taken in ink. "You didn't see this from me," she said. "I saw it from the building," I answered, and she closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. I stepped back into the lobby and felt the witness wave crest and recede interest, then discomfort, then avoidance. A woman glanced at the folded papers in my jacket and looked away. The glass doors opened and closed, sealing and unsealing the room like a lung. I pulled the stills out once more, just long enough to anchor them in my memory against the actual lot beyond the glass. The timestamp stared back under bright light, staring anyone to explain why the car learned a schedule I never shared. I folded the papers away and headed for the exit, the door chain at the threshold rattling softly as someone else came in. Outside, I leaned against the wall and breathed until the sound of my own pulse faded into traffic. My phone buzzed again. This time, I looked. "Where are you?" Laura had written. I typed, deleted, typed again. Running late, I sent, and the lie was finally honest in its intention. As I walked to my car, a security camera pivoted, slightly tracking motion, indifferent to meaning. I paused beneath it, letting my face register, because presence matters when you plan to be believed. I drove home by a different route and parked farther down the street, not to hide, but to arrive with options. The stills rustled in my jacket as I moved, a reminder that paper keeps time, even when people don't. I stood at the edge of the driveway and watched the house through the windshield glare, the glass turning windows into mirrors again. Inside, someone laughed, a short sound that cut off quickly. I turned the key but didn't start the engine. Public proof had shifted the air, and I could feel the house adjusting to being watched. The house closed around me the way a room does after a door shuts, familiar and suddenly precise about what it would allow. The location was the bedroom, and the narrow hallway outside it, late evening light thinning into angles, and my immediate goal was smaller than confrontation and heavier than denial. Find the point where logic breaks without making noise. I moved slowly because speed announces intent, and intent was the last thing I wanted to reveal. Laura was downstairs on a call, her voice a steady murmur rising and falling like something rehearsed, and I took the quiet as permission. The half-open drawer waited where it always did, a detail I would have missed months ago, the lip of wood catching light at an angle that turned absence into an outline. I stopped and listened. No footsteps, no pause in her voice, then slid the drawer the rest of the way out. The smell of cedar and old paper rose, the inside neat to the point of performance stacks, aligned dividers squared. I knew this drawer. I knew what lived here because I put it there. That knowledge was leverage, and it made my hands steadier than they had been all day. I lifted a folded sweater and felt the wrongness. Before I saw it, the way weight tells you something is missing, even when the space looks full. The item was domestic and small, not valuable in isolation, but decisive in context. A spare garage clicker I kept taped inside a cloth pouch, always on the left, always under the sweaters, so it wouldn't rattle. The pouch was there, the tape was there, the clicker was not. I stood still and counted breaths, cataloging the cost of looking. This was the point of no return for routine. I checked the pouch again, then the divider, then the back corner where things migrate when you pretend you're not searching. Nothing. I closed my eyes and pictured the drawer as it had been yesterday morning, the order intact, because order is how I make claims pass. When I opened them, the half-open drawer reflected me in the mirror across the room, my face cut by the edge of wood like a measurement line. This wasn't an argument, it was a subtraction. Laura's voice rose on the phone, laughter threaded through it. "No, that won't work," she said, light and competent. I eased the drawer shut and opened it again, a test for sound, the rails whispering compliance. I slid it closed and stepped back, scanning the room for the object's ghost. "Dan," she called from downstairs. "Yeah," I answered, the word pitched to travel without inviting reply. "Can you grab the mail?" she asked. "In a minute," I said, and the consequence was nothing. No follow-up, no suspicion. That was data, too. I moved to the nightstand and opened its drawer, not because the clicker would be there, but because searching creates patterns you can later deny. I found a pen, a receipt, a spare key I recognized immediately. The clicker's absence grew louder. I went to the garage and stood with the lights off, the air cool and concrete-scented, my goal to confirm without alerting. The car sat where it belonged, and I resisted the urge to press the wall button because opening doors you didn't close teaches people what you know. I scanned the hooks, the shelf, the toolbox lid, where things get set when hands are full. Nothing. I returned upstairs and leaned in the doorway, watching the mirror take the room apart and put it back together wrong. Laura's call ended. Her footsteps climbed. "You find the mail?" she asked, casual. "Later," I said. "Everything okay?" "Fine," I answered, and the word landed flat. A coin dropped on a table. She stepped into the bedroom and glanced at the dresser. "Why's the drawer open?" she asked, eyes flicking too fast. "It isn't," I said, and closed it with one finger, letting the sound be precise. "You're being weird," she said. And there it was again, a diagnosis framed as concern. "I'm checking something," I replied. "What inventory?" I said, because truth survives when you dress it correctly. She laughed once. "Since when?" "Since now." The room tightened. "You're making a mess," she said, and the needle line found a seam. "Say it again. Your title is spouse, not security." she added, and the cruelty was how cleanly she placed me outside the boundary she was drawing. "Read the label," I said quietly, pulling the pouch from the drawer and holding it up. "It says garage." Her smile thinned. "You lost it," she said, immediate and confident. "You misplace things." "This wasn't misplaced," I replied. "It was removed. The consequence was a step back small automatic." "Why are you accusing me?" she asked. "I'm not," I said. "I'm counting." She crossed the room and took the pouch from my hand, turning it over like an exhibit. "You're spiraling," she said. "You should talk to someone." "I will," I answered, and meant the evidence. She set the pouch on the dresser with care. "We share things," she said. "That's what marriage is." "We share schedules," I replied. "We don't share access without asking." Her eyes flashed. "You don't get to audit me," she said. "I do when the numbers don't add up," I said, and the line landed with a weight that made the mirror hold its breath. She turned away and opened the closet, the hangers chiming softly. "You're tired," she said. "You're seeing patterns that aren't there." "Patterns don't require belief," I said. "They require repetition." I sat on the edge of the bed and felt the mattress dip the house, acknowledging my presence without agreement. The drawer stayed shut now, obedient, and that obedience felt like a performance. I replayed the morning, the afternoon, the way the clicker's absence explained small delays and unexplained arrivals, the way the garage door had opened and closed on days I wasn't home. Laura returned with a sweater and folded it hand steady. "Drop it," she said not unkindly. "Drop what I asked." This she said, gesturing to the space between us. "It's not healthy. It's not random," I replied, and the sentence hardened the air. She exhaled. "You're going to ruin us," she said. "I'm trying to keep the math honest," I answered. We stood there, two people practicing calm, and the mirror took notes. I picked up the pouch again and slid it back into the drawer, leaving the drawer half open on purpose, a boundary marker. "If it turns up," I said, "we'll talk." "And if it doesn't?" she asked. "Then we already are," I replied. She shook her head and brushed past me. "I'm not doing this," she said, and left the room, the door clicking softly behind her. I stayed where I was and let the quiet press down, cataloging the new shape of the house. The absence had weight now, a domestic fact, that bent everything around it. The half-open drawer exposed the subtraction, and the missing clicker collapsed every innocent explanation at once. I closed the drawer and rested my palm on the wood, feeling for warmth, for permission, for anything that would make this feel reversible. There was nothing. I left the drawer ajar as a marker, knowing the house would learn to avoid it. The night I found the mismatch, the house behaved like it was trying to distract me. The location was the garage and the narrow utility room beside it, past tense, pressing everything into a sequence I could test, and my immediate goal was procedural and small, reconcile 2 clocks without announcing why. I waited until Laura went to bed, waited until the television upstairs swallowed her footsteps, and then I slipped down with the light off, letting the darkness keep my outline vague. The flickering bulb above the breaker panel hummed and stuttered, a tired insect of a sound that made the concrete walls breathe in short pulses, and I didn't touch it at first, because touching things changes them. I stood there and listened to the house settle, the faint pop of cooling metal, the distant tick of something that insisted on order. I opened the utility cabinet and found the binder I kept for warranties and logs, a habit from work that had always felt excessive until it wasn't. The garage door opener manual was there, tucked behind a folded receipt, and behind that the service sticker with its stamped ref code and location utility room, left panel clean, legible, boring. I ran a finger along the page and felt the paper drag back the way paper resists lies. I flipped to the maintenance log and traced the entries with a pencil. Dates blurred by habit, times noted, because times are where stories fall apart. The bulb flickered again, and I watched my reflection split across the metal face of the panel, 2 Daniels overlapping and disagreeing. The light flickers, and the reflection finally splits. I took a breath and compared the handwritten time to the digital readout on the opener itself, the small screen glowing a tired green. The opener read 9:14 p.m., The log entry from the same day read 8:52 p.m., stamped by the technician's tool when he'd replaced a sensor last year. A difference like that can be nothing, drift accumulating the way dust does. But I didn't stop there. I opened my phone and pulled the cloud copy of the screenshot I'd saved days earlier, careful to keep the screen angled so the flicker didn't wash it out. The message preview I'd captured had its own system time embedded a neat line beneath the text that read, 9:03 p.m. masked account, I-82 location tag garage, 3 clocks, 3 answers. Only one could be innocent. I didn't rush. Rushing is how you give people a defense. I turned on the desk lamp by the workbench and let the bulb overhead keep flickering, creating a rhythm I could lean into. I checked the router log next because routers are honest when people aren't. The admin page loaded slowly, the spinner stalling my patience, stretching thin but intact. The connection history listed device, pings with times and generic labels, unknown device, and there it was, a spike at 9:01 p.m., garage adjacent, the signal strong enough to place a body where I wasn't. The cost of this evidence arrived immediately. The admin page logged access attempts, and my own footprint joined the list. I accepted it. Evidence always charges admission. A floorboard creaked above me. Dan Laura's voice floated down soft and edged with sleep. "Just checking the breaker," I said, and the consequence was silence, the pause that says a story has been filed but not believed. I kept my eyes on the screen and took a photo of the router page framing the ref code in the corner and the timeline in one shot, so the argument would have to be honest later. I locked the phone and slid it into my pocket, the flickering bulb throwing my shadow long and thin against the door. "Why now?" she called. "Lights have been weird," I answered, and the lie was good because it was true. "Okay," she said, and the word traveled downward like permission. I shut the cabinet and stood there a second longer than necessary, letting the mismatch settle into my bones. When I went upstairs, the bedroom light was off, and Laura lay on her side, facing away. I sat on the edge of the bed and felt the mattress dip the house, acknowledging my weight. "You're obsessed," she said without turning. "I'm precise," I replied, and the sentence felt sharp enough to cut something clean. She rolled over, eyes reflecting the hall light in halves. "You're making problems," she said. "I'm finding them," I answered, and the consequence was her sitting up, shoulders tight. "Say it again. Your title is Husband, Not Technician," she said, the needle line landing exactly where it meant to. "Read the numbers out loud," I said quietly. "The room should hear them." She stared at me. "What numbers?" "The times I said. The ones that don't agree." Her laugh came out short. "You're counting minutes now, I'm counting overlaps," I replied, and the word overlap changed the air. She swung her legs off the bed. "You're tired," she said. "You're seeing patterns because you want to. Patterns don't want anything," I said. "They recur." I stood and walked to the doorway, letting the hall light frame us like a cheap stage. "The opener says 9:14, I continued. "The router says 9:01. The message says 9:03. So she asked. "So only one of us was home at 9, I said, and the consequence was immediate. She went still. "You can't prove that," she said, and the sentence reached for distance. "I don't have to," I replied. "Time already did." She shook her head. "This is crazy," she said. "You're scaring me." "You should be scared of math," I answered, and the cruelty in it surprised us both. She stepped past me into the hall. "I'm not doing this," she said again, the phrase she used when the script failed. I followed her down the stairs, not close enough to crowd close enough to witness. The flickering bulb in the kitchen had started acting up too, throwing our reflections into the microwave door in brief, stuttering flashes. "Turn that off," she said, pointing. "It's giving me a headache." "It's been on all day," I said. "No, it hasn't," she replied, and the denial was reflex, not argument. "Look," I said, opening my phone. "Don't," she snapped, and the word had edges now. "Keep smiling. Your router header is on the screen," I said, another needle line, and the consequence was her reaching out and stopping herself halfway, hands hovering like she'd been caught in a photograph. We stood there, the house humming, the flicker making time feel segmented. "You're trying to trap me," she said. "I'm letting the trap show itself," I answered. "Why?" "Because the clocks agree on one thing," I said. "Someone else learned our schedule." She turned away and leaned on the counter. "You don't know that," she said, quieter. "I know when I wasn't here," I replied. Silence settled heavier than accusation. A car passed outside, headlights sliding across the room, splitting our reflections again. I saved the router photo to a second folder and set the phone down face up, letting the glow do its work without my hands on it. "You're not sleeping down here," she said suddenly. "I wasn't planning to," I replied. "Then stop," she said. "Stop what? Stop counting," she said. "Stop listening to that light. I can't," I answered. "It's keeping time." She went upstairs and shut the door harder than necessary. I stayed and turned off the kitchen bulb, then the garage bulb, leaving the flicker to die where it started. In the quiet, the mismatch felt loud, a contradiction that didn't need me anymore. I wrote the times on a scrap of paper and folded it once, twice, the crease crisp. I placed it inside the binder and slid the binder back where it belonged, my reflection in the panel flattening as the light steadied. The flicker cut the room into seconds, and every second argued with the one before it. I climbed the stairs slowly, careful not to announce victory or fear, because neither would help me now. The clock stopped disagreeing the moment I stopped pretending they were confused. By the time the pressure turned outward, the house had learned my habits well enough to anticipate them. The location shifted between the front walk, the neighbor's porch line, and the strip of sidewalk, where conversations pretend to be casual, and my immediate goal was containment. Learn what others had noticed without letting them know why it mattered. I left early the next morning, not to escape Laura, but to be seen doing something ordinary. The metallic shadow of the mailbox stretched across the concrete as I stepped outside a sharp line that moved when I did and stayed put when I didn't like a witness with boundaries. Mara Jennings stood 2 houses down, clipboard tucked under her arm, pretending to check sprinkler notes. "Morning," she called. "Morning," I answered, and the exchange registered with the kind of neutrality people remember later. I walked to the end of the block and back, letting the neighborhood wake up around me. A jogger passed, earbuds in, nodding without looking. A delivery truck idled, engine ticking like a clock with opinions. At Mara's porch, I slowed. "You ever notice how sound carries here?" I asked, not stopping. "Depends," she said. "On what?" "On who's listening," I replied, and the sentence earned me a glance. "We had a complaint," she said after a beat. "About what noise?" she answered. "Late evenings. Garage door mostly." I nodded as if filing it mentally, because filing is a way to look harmless. "Anyone specific?" I asked. "Not officially," she said. "Unofficially, people talk," she replied, and the metallic shadow from the mailbox cut across her shoes, dividing them cleanly. "They say schedules overlap," she added, and the word overlap landed heavier outside than it ever had inside. I didn't push. Pressure escalates best when you let it breathe. "Thanks," I said, and started to walk away. "Dan," she called lower. "Be careful." Of what I asked. Of turning suspicion into spectacle, she said. "Public rooms remember," she added, and I thought of the lobby glass, the stills folded in my jacket. "So do private ones," I replied, and we both understood the warning wasn't for me. As I walked home, a woman watering her lawn paused and watched me longer than necessary. "Everything okay?" she asked, echoing a phrase that had followed me all week. "Fine," I said, and the word finally sounded like a placeholder. Inside, Laura was already gone, her coffee mug clean and dry by the sink, the house reset to neutral. I stood in the kitchen and listened to the refrigerator hum, the microwave clock blinking a steady lie. The metallic shadow of the ceiling fan blades cut across the counter in rotating slices, and I felt watched by absence. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "He parks late," it read. No name, no punctuation. The cost of reading it arrived immediately. My pulse jumped, and I checked the window without thinking. I typed back, "Who is this?" and deleted it. Then typed, "Which nights?" and deleted that too. Waiting felt like control again, a familiar shape. The phone buzzed again. The message said, "After 9." I saved it without replying the ref code assigned by the system in the corner of the screen, anchoring it to a time and a place. Witness evidence has a texture to it, soft at first, then abrasive once you touch it. That afternoon I took a different route home and slowed near the corner where the streetlight flickered on early. The metallic shadow from its housing fell across the sidewalk in a way that made faces look unfamiliar for a second longer than usual. Evan Holt stood there, jacket-zipped phone pressed to his ear. I didn't plan the encounter, but plans often pretend they didn't need you. He ended the call when he saw me. "Hey," he said, too friendly, too fast. "Hey," I replied, stopping at a polite distance. "You live around here?" he asked. "I do," I said. "You, just consulting," he answered, and the word felt like a badge he flashed and hid. "Long hours," I said. "Comes with the job," he replied. The streetlight flickered and his face split into light and shadow. "You park late," I said, conversational. "Do I?" he asked, smiling. "Most nights," I added. "After 9. His smile held, then adjusted. "Schedules change," he said. "They do," I agreed. "Yours overlaps mine." I continued, keeping my voice level. "That's a bold claim," he said, and the needle line surfaced without effort. "Say it again, your title is consultant, not neighbor," I replied, and the cruelty was how public it felt with the street open behind us. He glanced around. "You should be careful," he said. "People talk." "They do," I said, and let the echo do the work. He shifted his weight. "You're mistaken," he said. "Read the log out loud," I replied softly. "The camera contradicts you." His eyes flicked toward the streetlight, toward the houses that pretended not to listen. "What camera?" he asked. "The ones that don't blink," I said, and the consequence was his step back, small but involuntary. "I don't know what you think you saw," he said. "I know what I didn't," I replied. "I wasn't home." Silence followed, thick and instructive. "This is inappropriate," he said finally. "So is borrowing access," I answered, and the metallic shadow slid across his shoes as the light steadied. A car passed, washing us in headlights, and in that bright second he looked older, thinner, like a man caught between stories. "You should talk to your wife," he said. "I am," I replied, and turned away before the exchange could calcify into something reportable. At home, Laura stood at the counterphone in hand, jaw set. "Did you talk to Evan?" she asked, not looking up. "I talked to someone," I said. "You can't do that," she said. "You're making this public." "It was already public," I replied. "People noticed. People gossip," she snapped. "People log," I said. "They timestamp." She laughed sharp. "You're obsessed," she said. "You're humiliating us." "Read the room," I replied. "The room already knows." She slammed the phone down. "You think you're clever," she said. "You think this is a game." "I think witnesses change outcomes," I answered, and the sentence hardened her posture. "You're not a cop," she said. "I don't need a badge to count," I replied. The doorbell rang, an ordinary sound that felt like a verdict. Laura froze. I went to the door and opened it to find Mara clipboard under her arm, again expression professional. "Sorry to bother you," she said loud enough for the hallway to hear. "We need to follow up on the noise complaint." Laura appeared beside me, smile fixed. "Noise," she echoed. "From our garage." "That's right," Mara said. "We've had multiple reports." The metallic shadow from the porch light cut across the threshold, dividing inside from out. "This is ridiculous," Laura said. "Read the Times," I said quietly and felt her flinch. "We can schedule a review." Mara continued. "It won't take long." "Now?" Laura asked. "Now," Mara replied, and the witness wave gathered, curtains shifted. A door across the street cracked open. Laura turned to me. "You did this," she said. "I counted," I replied. She exhaled through her nose. "Fine," she said. "Let's get it over with." We stepped onto the porch, the house behind us suddenly small. "We'll need access," Mara said. Laura hesitated, then nodded. The metallic shadow crossed the driveway as the garage door lifted its motor, whining a familiar note. I watched Laura's face as the sound filled the space, watched the calculation flicker and vanish. The shadow slid across the concrete as the door rose and the neighborhood leaned in without pretending. I met Mara's eye and saw the question there, unasked and already answered. Pressure had escaped the house, and it wasn't going back inside quietly. The reversal didn't arrive as a shout. It arrived as paper. The location was the small desk in the study, late afternoon light, slanting low enough to make dust visible, and my immediate goal was arithmetic. Not argument. Reconcile. Money with movement. Before the day closed its books. I'd learned by then that truth prefers receipts, so I spread them out carefully, stacking statements by month, aligning corners like evidence wants to be aligned. The paper edge-cutting finger came first, an accident with consequence, as I slid a thin envelope free from a folder and felt the sting bloom bright and clean. I pressed my thumb to it and watched a bead form the red precise against white, and didn't curse because pain focuses. Laura was out, her calendar blocked with a meeting she hadn't mentioned, and the house felt temporarily neutral, like a room after people leave. I opened the envelope and unfolded the invoice, the ink crisp, the language polite, in the way companies use when they're sure. It was a charge summary not large enough to alarm on its own, but placed wrong enough to matter a financial detail that explained 100 small gaps if you let it. The header showed a vendor name I didn't recognize, a generic description that could have meant anything until it didn't. The safe fields sat where they always do, a short ref code in the corner, 4 characters I could say aloud without learning, a location tag, garage adjacent services, and the masked account ending how 82 patient and unmistakable. The time of day stamp read 4:38 p.m., and I stopped there, letting the clock pressure do its work without my help. I ran my finger down the line items and felt the cut sting again when the paper shifted, as if the document wanted to remind me it was real. The charge was recurring, modest timed, to days I'd marked as nothing, and suddenly those days rearranged themselves into something coherent. I pulled the router photo back up and placed it beside the invoice, then the screenshot of the message preview, then the CCTV stills folded thin enough to pass for a bookmark. Patterns don't require belief, they require repetition, and here it was, repetition with a price tag. "You're not doing this," Laura said from the doorway, and the words arrived with her sharp as if they'd been rehearsed on the drive home. I didn't look up. "I'm counting," I said. "Put that away," she snapped, and the command carried a tremor. "Read it," I replied. Out loud. She stepped closer, and the air shifted, her shadow crossing the desk in a way that split the light. "That's private," she said. "So is my money," I answered, and the sentence set the room's temperature. She reached for the paper and stopped herself, hands hovering the cut on my thumb, leaving a small red comma on the margin. "You're bleeding," she said. "It's paper," I replied. "It happens." "You're spiraling," she said. "You're hurting yourself." "I'm paying attention," I said. She laughed once, brittle. "You think this proves something? I think it explains something," I answered. Why access costs?" I said. "Why schedules change?" She shook her head. "That's not what it is." "Then say what it is." I replied. "Say it clearly." Silence filled the gap she left, instructive and heavy. "You're reaching," she said finally. "Read the masked digits," I said. "The room should hear them." She glanced at the invoice despite herself, eyes snagging on, "I'm 82. "That could be anything," she said. "It's everything," I replied. "It's consistency." She picked up the invoice, then, careful not to touch my thumb, and skimmed. "You don't understand billing," she said, defaulting to authority. "Say it again. Your title is director, not accountant," I replied, and the needle line found its seam. Her jaw tightened. "You're humiliating me," she said. "I'm auditing," I answered. Different posture. She set the paper down with precision. "You went through my things," she said. "I went through ours," I replied. "There's a difference." "There isn't," she snapped. "There is," I said. "One has consent." She turned away and paced the floor, creaking in time with her steps. "You don't trust me," she said. "Trust is not a substitute for records," I replied. "You're cold," she said. "I'm accurate," I answered. I reached for the calculator and keyed the numbers in, slowly letting the clicks punctuate the room. The total wasn't dramatic. That was the point. Dramatic totals get argued. Modest ones get ignored until they accumulate into certainty. "This is normal," she said. "People spend money. People align spending with presence," I said. "These align with absence. You're obsessed with time," she said. Time obsesses with patterns, I replied. She stopped pacing. You're going to ruin us, she said. You already charged it, I replied, and the cruelty surprised us both. That's not fair, she said. Fair is not the metric, I answered. Traceability is. My phone buzzed once on the desk and I didn't look. Don't, she said immediately. Don't what I asked. Don't involve anyone else, she said. It's already involved, I replied, gesturing to the papers. Paper doesn't care about privacy. She folded her arms. You're trying to catch me, she said. I'm letting the records speak, I answered. Records lie, she said. They repeat, I replied. She leaned over the desk, eyes bright. You think you're smarter than me? She said. I think numbers are, I answered. They don't get tired. I slid the invoice back into the envelope and felt the paper edge kiss my thumb, again reopening the cut, just enough to remind me to keep pressure. I pressed it with a tissue and watched the red soak through a small cost for clarity. Stop, she said softly. Please. The plea landed differently, less armored. Explain it, I said, matching her volume. Explain the vendor. Explain the timing. She closed her eyes. It's not what you think, she said. Then what is it, I asked? Say it. She opened her eyes and looked past me at the window, at the reflection that never quite lined up anymore. It's complicated, she said. Complicated costs more, I replied, and it bills regularly. The phone buzzed again, insistence edging into pressure. I glanced down and saw the notification header and alert from the bank app. I rarely opened a summary I hadn't requested. I didn't open it yet. I waited. You're waiting for something, she said. I'm respecting the clock, I answered. The light shifted as a cloud passed, and the room changed its mind about shadows. I opened the app and held it where she could see, without touching it, the screen reflecting our faces in halves. Read the last 4, I said. Read them out loud. She didn't. Read the location. I continued. Garage adjacent services. Her breath hitched a small sound with weight. The paper sliced my thumb again as the numbers lined up and the account ending refused to pretend it was coincidence. She stepped back. You're trapping me, she said. I'm documenting, I replied. Traps require intent. You want to punish me, she said. I want the truth, I answered. Punishment follows patterns. A car passed outside, and the reflection in the glass shifted, splitting us cleanly down the middle. She looked older in that split second thinner, like a person realizing the story they practiced wouldn't fit the facts. If you do this, she said, there's no coming back. We passed that exit, I replied, when the billing started. She stared at the desk, at the papers, at the tissue with blood on it. You're hurt, she said. I'm informed, I answered. Different wound. She turned away and grabbed her bag. I'm going out, she said. Be back later. After 9, I asked. She flinched. Don't, she said. Read the time, I replied, and the needle line cut without raising my voice. She left without another word, the door closing softly, professionally. I stood alone and gathered the papers, aligning them one last time, sliding the invoice into a labeled folder I hadn't needed before. The cut on my thumb throbbed in time with the house's quiet, a reminder that even small edges can open skin if you're careless. I saved photos of the invoice and the alert duplicating them the way habits persist after innocence. I washed my hands and watched the blood swirl down the drain, bright, then gone. The invoice settled into the folder like a verdict, and the house learned what the numbers meant. The paper cut throbbed as the door shut, and I understood the reversal had already priced itself in. By the time I decided to corner the truth, Rain had already decided for me. The location was outside Driveway Street, the thin margin between my house and the rest of the block, and my immediate goal was sequence, not surprise. Line-up behavior until denial ran out of space. I put on my coat and felt the rain-wet sleeve cling immediately, fabric darkening, where drops struck a tactile reminder that patterns don't stay theoretical once you step into them. I didn't announce where I was going. Laura hadn't come back yet, and the house held that absence like a held breath. I stepped into the drizzle and walked the block slowly, letting the rain blur edges and make reflections honest. Windows became mirrors. Mirrors became witnesses. I stopped beneath the streetlight and checked my phone, not for messages, but for my own note states, times the careful list I'd been building without admitting it was a ledger of betrayal. I had logged arrivals and departures the way I log claims, date time, source confidence level. I hadn't needed certainty to begin. I needed repetition. Tonight was about closure. I crossed the street and stood where the sidewalk dipped the place that gave me a clean view of my driveway without being obvious. Rain streaked my sleeve and pooled at my cuff cold, seeping in, and I welcomed it because discomfort sharpens focus. At 8:47 p.m., a car turned the corner too fast and slowed two late headlights, cutting the rain into bright threads. I didn't look at the car. I looked at the time. 8:49 p.m. The engine idled. At 8:50, the lights went dark. The pattern matched my notes without needing persuasion. I stayed where I was and let the minutes pass. At 8:57, the garage door lifted a fraction and stopped a cautious test. At 8:58, it opened fully. I wrote nothing down. I didn't need to. The rain soaked my sleeve through, now cold enough to numb my wrist, and I flexed my fingers to keep them working. At 9:01, a light flicked on inside the garage and went off again. At 9:03, the door closed. I felt a calm settle that surprised me. Not relief, not rage, but the quiet you get when a puzzle finishes itself without asking if you like the picture. I turned and walked back toward the house, rain following me like an accomplice. Inside the house smelled faintly of soap, the kind that announces an attempt at reset. I hung my coat by the door and watched the sleeve drip onto the mat water, pooling in a shape that mirrored the log I carried in my head. The location shifted to the living room lamps, low the television off, and my immediate goal changed from observation to declaration. Laura stood by the counterphone in hand, posture arranged. "Where were you?" she asked, not looking up. "Walking," I said. "In the rain." "Especially," I replied. She glanced at my sleeve, then away. "We need to stop this," she said. "Stop what I asked. This surveillance," she snapped. "You're acting like a stranger." "I'm acting like a record," I replied. "Records don't sleep." She put the phone down. "You followed me," she said. "I counted. I answered." "There's a difference. You don't trust me," she said again, the phrase worn thin. "Trust doesn't override timestamps," I replied. "You're obsessed," she said. "You're consistent," I answered. "You don't get to do this," she said. "I already did," I replied, and the sentence landed with the weight of a fact. She laughed sharp and brittle. "You think you know everything," she said. "I know enough," I answered. Enough to stop pretending. I walked past her and sat at the table, spreading my notebook open. The rain tapped the window like a metronome. "Read it," she said, mocking now. "Read your little list." "I will," I said, and began, voice even. Monday arrived 9:02, Tuesday 8:59, Thursday 9:01. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You're making this up," she said. "Say it again. Your title is wife, not editor," I replied, and the needle line cut cleanly. She flinched. "You don't know what you saw," she said. "I know when I wasn't here," I replied, "and I know when the door moved." She crossed her arms. "So what she said? You think this proves an affair?" "I think it proves access," I answered. "I think it proves overlap." "You're wrong," she said. "Then correct the log," I replied. "Tell me which nights I miscounted." Silence answered. The rain picked up, drumming harder, and the room leaned into it. "You're going to ruin everything," she said quietly. "Everything already has a receipt," I answered. "You just didn't think I'd read it." She shook her head. "You're cold," she said. "I'm precise," I replied. "Cold is a temperature. Precision is a choice." My phone buzzed on the table. I didn't touch it. "That's him, isn't it?" she said, eyes on the screen. "Who?" I asked. "Don't," she said. "Don't play dumb." "I'm not," I replied. The phone buzzed again. Insistence layered over rain. I picked it up and checked the lock screen, not the message. The sender's initial glowed there enough to be understood without being read. I set the phone back down. "You invited this," she said. "I documented it," I replied. "Invitations are different." She sat across from me, hands flat on the table. "What do you want?" She asked the first honest question in days. "Truth," I said. "Not explanations, not tone. truth. And then she asked, "Then we decide," I replied, "based on the same facts." She swallowed. "If I tell you," she said, "you'll never look at me the same." "I already don't," I replied. The log changed that. Her eyes filled, but she blinked it away. "You think this makes you righteous?" she said. "It makes me finished," I answered. Finished pretending. I stood and walked to the window, rain streaking down my reflection, splitting and recombining with each passing car. "I watched the door tonight," I said, not turning. "I watched it move at the same minute it always does." "You followed me," she said again, softer. "I stood still," I replied. "Patterns came to me." She didn't answer. I turned back to the table and closed the notebook, the sound final. "We're done hiding," I said. "Tomorrow we stop making this private." Her head snapped up. "You wouldn't," she said. "Read the room," I replied. "It already knows." The rain eased outside, leaving a hush that felt like a held verdict. The rain-dark sleeve clung to my wrist as the log closed, and every pattern pointed the same way. I set the notebook down, knowing the corner I'd built left only one exit, and it wasn't denial. The second public scene didn't need a stage. It needed witnesses who hadn't agreed to be gentle. The location was the community meeting room at the clubhouse, folding chairs set in uneven rows, fluorescent lights bright enough to flatten faces. And my immediate goal was finality, not persuasion. Place the truth where denial couldn't reach it. I arrived early with the envelope tucked under my arm, the paper stiff and ordinary, the kind that looks like mail until it isn't. People filtered in with coffee cups and complaints coats damp from the rain, easing outside conversations low and practiced. Laura came in last, eyes scanning the room before landing on me, then the envelope, and I watched calculation move through her like a weather front. Evan Holt slipped in behind her and took a seat near the aisle posture-composed phone, face down on his knee. I chose a chair in the second row, close enough to be seen, far enough to be heard without shouting. Mara Jennings stood at the front with a clipboard and the practiced patience of someone used to moderating small fires. "We'll keep this brief," she said, and the word brief never means what it promises. Agenda items rolled by, sprinklers, parking noise complaints, each one a rehearsal for the thing no one had named. When it came, it arrived dressed as procedure. "We've had repeated concerns about garage access after hours," Mara said, eyes flicking to Laura, then to Evan, then back to me. "Before we escalate, we need clarity." I raised my hand. The room shifted. "Go ahead," Mara said, and the permission sounded heavier than it should have. I stood and felt the envelope anchor my hand, its edges firm a boundary I could feel. "I'm not here to speculate," I said, voice level calibrated for rooms that remember tone. "I'm here to submit a record." Murmurs rippled, curiosity sharpening. "Records can be misleading," Evan said from his seat, smiling thinly. "So can stories," I replied, not looking at him. "This isn't a story." I set the envelope on the table by the podium and slid it open, deliberate, letting the paper whisper carry. Inside was a USB drive, taped to a card labeled with a date and time in my handwriting, neat and legible. "What's that?" someone asked. "Audio," I said. Time-stamped. Laura shifted in her chair. "This is inappropriate," she said, louder than necessary. "This is private." "Private ended when access became shared," I replied. "Say it again. Your title is resident, not editor," and the needle line landed in the open air, drawing a line the room could see. Mara hesitated, then nodded. "If it's relevant," she said. "It is," I replied, and plugged the drive into the room's system with hands that didn't shake. The screen lit with a waveform and a timestamp in the corner, clean and unarguable. I didn't explain how I got it. I didn't need to. I pressed play. The room filled with a sound that didn't belong there, a whisper close, and practiced the cadence unmistakable. "Say it quietly," a voice murmured, Evans lower than I'd ever heard it, confident in its privacy. A chair scraped. Someone coughed. "He won't." Laura's voice answered, softer than I remembered, certain. The whisper continued, intimate and unhurried, naming the space like it owned it. I watched faces change as recognition traveled faster than denial. I watched Evan's smile freeze, then rearrange. "This is edited," he said too fast. "It's not," Mara replied, eyes on the timestamp. "The system verifies integrity." "You don't know the context," Laura said, standing now. "Read the time I said. Read the location tag." The screen showed it plainly, garage 9:03 p.m. The room leaned forward without deciding to. I stopped the audio before it could become spectacle. Silence followed, thick and instructive. "That's enough," Mara said, and the authority in her voice settled the space. "We'll proceed with a review." "Proceed," I echoed and sat down the envelope, now empty and lighter for it. Evan stood. "This is a violation," he said, scanning the room for allies. "You recorded us. The device recorded the space," I replied. "Spaces remember when people don't." "You're destroying lives," Laura said, voice breaking through the murmur. "I'm ending a lie," I answered. Different outcome. Questions came then, not all kind. How long, someone asked. "Does this affect parking?" another said, grasping for relevance. "We'll handle logistics," Mara said, cutting through. "Right now we need compliance. Compliance with what Evan demanded." "Access protocols," Mara replied. "And transparency." The words transparency and access hung together like a verdict. Laura looked at me, eyes wet, anger flickering beneath. "You promised we'd keep this between us," she said. "I promised we'd stop pretending," I replied, and the truth of it hurt worse than any accusation. The meeting dissolved into smaller knots of conversation, people whispering about whispers, phones lifted and lowered a room, deciding what it would remember tomorrow. I stood and took the envelope back, folded it once, twice the crease crisp, and tucked it under my arm again because objects like to return to their roles. Evan brushed past me. "You think you won," he said low. "I think the room did," I replied, and he didn't answer. Laura lingered by the door. "We need to talk," she said. "We just did," I answered. "In public." She flinched. "You didn't have to play it," she said. "I had to end it," I replied. Outside, the night had cleared rain, leaving the pavement dark and reflective. People spilled onto the sidewalk in small groups, the story already fragmenting into versions. Mara joined me by the steps. "You understand what this triggers," she said. "I understand what it ends," I replied. She nodded, professional again. "We'll be in touch." "You already were," I said, and she allowed herself a thin smile. Laura stood a few feet away, hands clenched. "You're satisfied?" she asked. "I'm finished," I replied. The difference mattered. Evan walked to his car and paused, looking back once like a man measuring distance. I didn't meet his eye. I drove home alone and parked in the driveway without ceremony, the house ahead of me suddenly smaller, more honest. I set the envelope on the counter and washed my hands, the water loud in the quiet. The reflection in the window showed one figure where there had been two, and the absence felt earned. The audio filled the room with a whisper that refused to stay private, and the envelope finally gave up its weight. I left the clubhouse, knowing the truth had witnesses now, and witnesses don't forget. After the meeting, the world didn't end. It rearranged. The location narrowed to the driveway, the threshold, the quiet rooms that follow a public reckoning, and my immediate goal was control, restore it, without spectacle. I drove home alone and parked where I always had the engine ticking itself cool, as if nothing had happened. The house waited with its lights off, a deliberate neutrality that felt earned. I stood at the door and pulled the trembling key from my pocket, surprised by the shake in my hand, because fear had already done its worst, and left. The key scraped once against the lock, before finding purchase metal on metal, a small sound that carried more weight than it should have. Inside, the air felt thinner, less practiced. I stepped in and shut the door, the click final, and stood still long enough to feel the house recognize me again without asking permission. The goal wasn't confrontation now. It was execution. Decide what stays, decide what leaves decide. How this ends, without cruelty pretending to be justice. Laura came in an hour later, quiet as a courtesy she hadn't offered before. She stopped just inside the doorway and watched me the way people watch a shoreline after a storm, checking what moved and what didn't. "We need to talk," she said, the sentence exhausted from repetition. "We need to decide," I replied, And the difference mattered. I set my keys on the counter and heard the tremor as they landed, the sound exposing my hand, even as my voice stayed level. She glanced at them. "You don't have to do this," she said. "Do what I asked. Be so cold." "I'm being clear," I answered. "Cold is when you hide heat." She folded her arms and leaned back against the counter, posture defensive and small at once. "You humiliated me," she said. "You corrected the record," I replied. "Publicly," she added. "Because it was public," I said. The exchange settled into the room like furniture you don't plan to move again. We stood there and spoke in practicalities because emotion had lost its leverage. "I'll stay with my sister," she said. "Tonight," I answered. "Longer?" she asked. "Until it's sorted," I replied. "Sorted how keys access schedules," I said. "And then paperwork." She flinched at the word paperwork as if it were a verdict. "You've already decided," she said. "I decided when the whisper had witnesses," I answered. "This is follow-through." She took a breath and nodded a small acceptance that didn't look like forgiveness. "I need time," she said. "Time doesn't belong to either of us right now," I replied. "Logistics do. The needle lines were done. There was no reason to cut anymore." I walked to the drawer and opened it, the same drawer that had taught me subtraction, and took out the spare set of keys, the ones that used to mean trust. The metal chimed softly as I separated them, the trembling key in my hand, choosing which ring it belonged to by weight alone. "These," I said, placing her set on the counter. "And the garage access," I added. She reached for them and hesitated. "You're locking me out," she said. "I'm locking the house," I replied. "There's a difference." She picked them up and held them like something borrowed that wouldn't be returned. "What about you?" she asked. "What about me?" "Where do you go in this?" "I stay," I answered. "I finish what I started." The sentence didn't sound brave. It sounded procedural, and that steadiness felt like relief. She gathered a bag without ceremony, moving through the rooms as if following a checklist. I stayed in the kitchen and listened to the house relearn its sounds: zippers, drawers, footsteps, each one a note in a new arrangement. When she came back, she paused at the door and looked at me as if searching for a version that could soften this. "You didn't have to make it so final," she said. "Final is kind," I replied. "It doesn't pretend." She nodded once and opened the door. The night air came in and went out again with her, efficient and clean. The door shut. Silence didn't rush to fill it. It settled. I stood alone and took inventory, because inventory is how I measure safety. The lights worked. The locks turned. The garage door responded only to my press. I tested it once and stopped because repetition can become habit again if you let it. I sat at the table and felt the tremor in my hand finally ease the key lying still on the wood like a promise kept. The trembling key steadied as I set it down, and the house accepted the decision without argument. I exhaled and realized I hadn't breathed fully since the lobby, since the room had leaned forward to listen. The breath felt like an ending more than a beginning. Later, I walked through the rooms and turned off lights one by one, watching reflections collapse into single shapes instead of doubles. The mirror over the sink gave me back a face that looked older and clearer at the same time, a man who would be recognized by his own routines again. I washed my hands and watched the water run clean, the small ritual grounding me in something that didn't lie. In the bedroom, I changed the sheets, because change that announces itself is easier to live with than change that pretends nothing happened. I set my phone on the nightstand and left it there face down, not because I was afraid of messages, but because I didn't need them. Justice doesn't buzz. I slept, and the sleep was heavy and untroubled, the kind that comes when your body believes the locks. In the morning, I woke without the urge to check times, to listen for doors to count. I made coffee and stood at the window, the street ordinary again, the mailbox shadow clean and still. The house felt smaller and truer, a place that would hold one schedule without complaint. I picked up the keys and slipped them into my pocket, the trembling gone, the weight familiar. Control returned not with noise, but with the quiet confidence of a lock that turns only once. The next steps would be slow and documented and dull, and that was exactly what I wanted. The night had taken enough. The morning would keep what remained. I'm back in the present now, standing in the quiet that follows a decision. and the house looks at me from a slightly wrong angle as if it's still adjusting its frame. The location is the hallway and the front room early morning light coming in low and honest, and my immediate goal is not repair but placement. Put myself where the reflection can no longer argue. The off-angle mirror by the door catches me as I pass, returning a version that doesn't line up perfectly with my movements, a reminder of how this began. I stop and look deliberately, letting the glass do what it does best when you don't rush it. The man staring back isn't surprised anymore. He's quieter, narrower somehow, shaped by subtraction. I straighten the mirror a fraction, not to correct it, but to acknowledge that alignment is a choice. Outside, a car passes, and light slides across the wall, briefly splitting the room into past and now before settling again. I move through the house and feel how differently it responds. Floors don't creak with secrets, doors open without hesitation. The goal that used to dominate every step, listen, count, verify, has fallen away, leaving room for simpler actions. I make coffee and set one mug on the counter, not two. The sound of ceramic touching stone is clean final. I sit at the table and watch steam rise, my reflection bending in the dark surface of the liquid, then dissolving as the heat shifts. I step out of the glass and leave it nothing to hold. The line lands without drama, not as a revelation, but as a fact already lived into. The house hums around me, appliances doing their small, honest jobs, time moving forward without commentary. I check my phone once, not because I expect something, but because rituals end more cleanly when you acknowledge them. There's nothing there that matters. No late explanations, no last attempts to reframe. I set the phone down face up this time, letting it exist without power over me. I open the front door and let air move through the room, carrying the smell of wet pavement and morning leaves, and I notice how the light hits the off-angle mirror again, flattening the reflection instead of splitting it. For weeks I'd lived inside surfaces, windows, screens, panes of glass that told half-truths depending on where you stood. Now I'm standing where the truth doesn't distort. I step outside and lock the door, the sound firm and unremarkable, and walk down the drive without looking back. The driveway no longer feels like a stage. It's just concrete. I reach the sidewalk and pause, listening out of habit, then recognize the habit for what it is and let it go. Across the street, a neighbor waves. I nod back, the exchange light unburdened by what either of us knows or thinks we know. Public spaces don't press on me anymore. Private ones don't whisper. I walk the block once, feeling the morning settle into my muscles, and return with nothing new to report to myself. Inside again, I gather the last objects that belong to a version of my life that ended cleanly. A folder of copies I no longer need to review, the spare charger by the couch, a jacket that smells faintly of rain and waiting. I don't throw them away. I place them where they belong or don't belong, because order after chaos isn't about erasure. It's about boundaries. I pass the mirror one more time and see only one figure moving, one shadow responding correctly to light. The glass can't trap me now because I'm not asking it to tell me who I am. I sit at the table again and write a short list, not of times or evidence, but of next steps that don't require vigilance. Call the attorney, update. Accounts change, passwords that no longer need to be secret. The list is boring, and that boredom feels earned. I fold it once and set it aside, trusting myself to return to it without fear. The house holds steady, indifferent in the way safe places are. I finish my coffee and rinse the mug, the sound of water familiar and grounding, and leave it upside down to dry. Before I turn out the lights, I pause in front of the off-angle mirror and let myself be reflected one last time without adjustment. The angle stays wrong. That's fine. It doesn't owe me symmetry anymore. I open the door and step out, pulling it shut behind me, the latch clicking softly into place. I leave the mirror behind, knowing it can't follow me where alignment no longer matters. I walk down the path with an easy pace, keys steady in my pocket, and feel the future narrow into something manageable. The reflection finally lets go, and the quiet walks with me instead.